Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining this important conversation today. Welcome to Color Matters, a 4-part web series brought to you by community education group and Equality Florida. Today, we have 3 amazing panelists here to talk to you about the relationship between LGBTQ folk and law enforcement. Now, I know this is a very broad topic with many layers, but the goal is to kind of peel back some of those layers tonight and really have a good conversation. So please help me in welcoming our amazing panelists, Aryah Lester, Deputy Chief James Young, Chanel Haley, and Ty Williams. Hi, everyone. How are you?
Hi.
Good. It's so nice to see everyone's smiling face. And thank you so much for being here today. First and foremost, I would love for you all to tell the audience who you are and the work that you do. So let's start with Aryah.
Hello, everyone. I'm Aryah Lester. I'm the Deputy Director of the Transgender Strategy Center. What we give is capacity building and technical assistance to trans-led organizations across the United States, as well as really building up our future leadership with our leadership development program and corporate and CIS foundation trainings and education, with diversity and inclusion being number 1 with that. And it's good to see everyone here. We all have our own little intersections. You know, I live in Florida where you are, and I have family and lived in Georgia where Chanel lives, and me, Ty, and James all know each other. It's really good to be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. How about you, Deputy Chief James Young?
Yeah, thank you, Nikole. It's great to be here tonight. So obviously, I'm a Deputy Chief with the Orlando Police Department, and I oversee a large bureau and division here within the police department. My career, I've been in law enforcement for 30 years now, both here at Orlando as well as another agency before that, and I served in the military before that. A lot of the work I do kind of stems, I'm a cisgendered, openly gay male, and a lot of the work I've done throughout my career and still continue to do is try to educate other law enforcement officers and other agencies on having policies in place, to be inclusive of the trans community, and as well as have policies in place that, bias-free policing policies and as such. I also work with the community, so I do a lot of presentations, just like this one, about interactions with the between law enforcement and the trans community, to help better educate, the community, but as well as law enforcement. We need to learn too, and we need to grow and change with what the community needs from us. So those are the things I've done, and I'm glad to be here tonight. Thank you, Nikole.
Yeah, well, James, thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you do. I know sometimes it puts you in a difficult position because you're an amazing ally. And I know when you hear about different things that happen with law enforcement, for you, it's just kind of like, hey, what can we do? But thank you so much for all of the work that you do. How about you? You might be muted.
What happened? Yeah, there you go.
There you go. Okay, you can go, Chanel.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. I'm Chanel Haley. I'm the Gender Policy Manager at Georgia Equality. This is my 5th year there. And so what Georgia Equality does, if you don't know, it is very similar to Equality Florida and all the other equalities around the state of the country. We're the one of 2 that have the state in front of the equality. But we are the statewide LGBT education and advocacy organization. As the gender policy manager, I work with politicians and organizations to make sure that the gender non-conforming community and transgender community is represented within policies and within every aspect of the intersections that we work with. I do a lot more than that. I'm a graduate of the Atlanta Citizens Police Academy. Then I actually am called in to do police scenarios with the recruits that we have around intimate partners violence, and around how to check IDs when they're stopping them, when they encounter a trans person during stopping. And I've also done trainings with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the administrative offices, which is the serial location here in Atlanta, and then also actually was inside the prison.
Awesome. Well, no, thank you so much for all the work that you do. You know, some of the things that you were highlighting are such huge issues in our community, whether it's intimate partner violence or, I mean, and that's something that nobody really talks about. It's just the amount of people that go through that it's just astronomical. How about you, Ty?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ty Williams. I'm the project coordinator for Community Education Group. We're based out in West Virginia as well as the DMV area. I mainly coordinate the DMV area, and mainly right now is trying to develop transmasculine network within the DMV area, and especially within the Black community. That's our focus right now. Is we have it's basically honing in on what the issues are and making sure that the DMV is it's one of them areas where you don't really hear too much about trans men. You know, there's so much being monolithic or whatnot, but making sure that our black and brown trans masculine individuals are really taken care of and seeing what their need is. So right now our focus is my focus as a project coordinator is to make sure that we develop that network within the DMV area for our Black and brown trans men, and making sure that they have those resources.
Yeah, thank you so much for the work that you do. Uplifting that experience is so important because all of us, we're a melting pot. You know what I mean? It's not one experience over the other. It's all of us against hate, you know? So thank you all so much. And I do want to kind of just jump into the conversation. So this question is for anyone who kind of wants to take it. But how would you describe the relationship between LGBTQ individuals and law enforcement in your area? Because I know we represent a lot of different areas here. So anybody can start.
Well, I guess since I'm in the national area of the capital, I can start. DC is a very particular place, and it's really tricky here because your law enforcement agencies kind of intertwine and overlap when we're talking about federal agencies, and then also when we're talking about DC in of itself, where I currently stay at. So you have DC Metropolitan Police, and then you have the federal police, and then you have different restrictions when it comes to those. I would really like to bring up Ruby Corrado, who talks a lot about how the feds really treat the transgender community here locally within DC. But I think when you look at that trickiness, that's kind of everywhere where we go to when you're LGBTQ, but specifically when you're a Black trans person, masculine or feminine presenting, there comes to be a lot of complications when it comes to profiling, when it comes to attacks on our bodies, when it comes to unsolved cases and cold cases of our murders. It gets real complicated, and I think having these conversations, as we do also with James on a federal level through the Department of Justice's Community Services program, to really try to tackle some of these subjects and bridge those gaps in understanding and learning.
No, it's so true. The point that you speak to, the conversations are so important, but matching that with action on a federal level. You know, that's the type of change that we need to see. I think sometimes, especially as advocates, we get a little exhausted having some of the conversations where we're like, how many spaces do we have to say it before we see true change? And it's just, it really is. It's so important to get out there and vote for individuals who have our community's best interests at heart. Does anyone else want to kind of describe their opinion? I think sometimes, especially as advocates.
Here in Atlanta, it's a mixed bag. So we have done a lot of work with law enforcement, and I mean at least over probably over a decade. And so this all started actually with a raid that happened that was botched, and it was a lawsuit. It was really bad originally, and so the city had to respond, by court order. So I'm trying to make this shorter. And what I would say when it comes to the trans community specifically is that that there was a buy-in that was done around creating our SOPs or standard operating procedures that actually address the trans community. So that was done again about 10 years ago. So I think that if you are from that era and you actually had a piece or a seat at the table to do that, then your perception is probably that the interactions with law enforcement are good, because that's why we had an LGBT liaison. We went from having one to now having two that are required. That is why we have the SOPs that's been updated. That is the reason why that we're called in to do these scenarios at the academy. But then on the flip side of that is that then there's some younger people, and so organizations built around this that actually feel that the police are not doing a good enough job. And so, as you're seeing now in the United States, defund people for wanting to defund the police, and people who don't, it's kind of about how your interactions have been. Mm-hmm. And so there are certainly people who feel uncomfortable now, even though there's programs that's been in place particularly around sex workers to where there's pre-arrest diversion instead of waiting for a person to be arrested and to be helped. That, of course, is only in certain neighborhoods, though, where that was a high concentration of sex workers. But there has been a lot of work done, and as a person who lived here since 1989, I have seen a complete 180 of the way the police used to treat the community to how they treat now. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But hopefully later on in this discussion, I'll be able to talk more about what it is if you feel like you're uncomfortable and you have anxiety around police officers, or you want to know more of what to really do to get involved.
No, that's great. And the silver lining of that is the positivity that you have, that even though you said it's not perfect, things have changed. We've moved the needle a bit. And that's all that we ever want in this movement, is that just to see some type of progress. Because there's nothing more defeating, like you said, fighting the fight for 10 plus years and not seeing anything change. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would like to say, being a person, I just moved from Orlando in January to DC, and I will say that when I first the thought about moving to Orlando kind of scared me a little bit, just because of not too far from there is where Trayvon Martin happened, in Sanford. So if the history around the area, it did make me a little worried. But I will say that after living in Orlando and experiencing with the certain classes that we were able to see how the relationship was, where the Orlando PD invited us in versus us, and they also wanted to hear what we want and listen. And then when I moved to DC, I thought, it would be, because it's more culturally, I mean, DC, like Aryah said, it's different. It's its own little melting pot. But I thought it would be more easier to maneuver, being a black man, I'm not going to lie, going to DC, and because there's so many different layers of federal and state and district, it's I don't even know who to even go to if something was to happen. It's so confusing, because there's so many. I was like, man, I'd rather go back to Orlando where I can go to a liaison and say, hey, this is what I got going on. At least I know I can start somewhere. And it might not be the best situation, but it's a start, having that, liaison or having that situation. So seeing the two, it's really different. And again, seeing the culturally and seeing the difference of thinking that one's a metropolitan, so you might have more resources versus one is not. And it's wow, I personally have more resources down in Orlando than I might have in DC right now.
Mm-hmm. I think those nuances are important to talk about too, because like you said, Chanel, there's different groups and different places, like what Tyree pointed out with Orlando in reference to DC, to where it seemed seemed you can say that there's a growing increase in the positive relation between community and law enforcement. But I think we also have to look at that on a national level. It's not just those cities where it is working. And like you said, Tyree, looking at those small rural places, within the deep South, or within the Midwest, away from all of the places that we know are a bit more progressive. And when we look at conservative places to where, racism is the same as it's been in the 50s and the 60s, and then laying that on top of, people there not even having the basic understanding of what it means to have to live a trans life. And I think that that's what really needs to be addressed, and that's part of the things that are being addressed with the whole move to reallocate certain funding and put it out to community and trusted people, because the trust of the community with law enforcement on a national level is still very low.
No, absolutely. And James, from a law enforcement perspective, yeah, what do you see?
Yeah, so I mean, and Aryah, thank you, because the change. You're right. It's always moving. It's always progressing. And Ty, thank you for recognizing Orlando's a good place. But we see it in Central Florida. Orlando, like for the longest time, Orlando, we were the only ones that were getting those programs in place and doing those things. And now that our former chief is now the sheriff, he's implemented those at the sheriff's office. So it's growing. A lot of this, Safe Place program, the LGBT liaison programs and things like that. It's growing. And like you said, it's that geographical area where I could go one county over and or any one of us could go one county over, and it could be a totally different experience. So it's that movement forward. And like you said, it's those small steps, but they mean so much. From a personal example of mine, like I would have never thought. Obviously, a lot of this movement with the LGBT movement started at Stonewall, 50 years ago. And then last year at World Pride, Stonewall actually threw a party for all the LGBT law enforcement officers that were there at Stonewall on the night of the anniversary. So, to celebrate with the community. So things like that. I mean, if it takes 50 years, I think all of us here will continue that fight for as long as it takes to get there and continue to, like you said, build that trust. It really is about that trust with the law enforcement, feeling comfortable. We want to make sure, at least I do, and I know a lot of law enforcement officers do, want to make people feel like they can come to them if there's a problem, because we do want to help and we want to be able to solve any issues that you're having.
Yeah, and I think what's important to highlight is a lot of individuals think a certain area has protections, but like you mentioned, you could go one city over, one county over, and all of your protections are gone and null and void. And I think that shows the importance of voting, you know what I mean, and making sure that those individuals, the right individuals, are in the places of power that need to be. So I want to ask the group, for our viewers who aren't familiar with some situations LGBTQ individuals, specifically trans people, find themselves in law enforcement, can you give an example? I know that some are the overt use of the wrong pronouns, using dead names and things like that. But could you give examples to our viewers of some things that you've heard in the community?
Well, I can give an example of a precinct that is known to have a really good score when it comes to LGBT relations, and that's in Miami Beach, South Beach, specifically Florida. Although that precinct has made so many strides, and we have and had so many allies within the PD there. I personally had an example of just going with my best friend and roommate to go pick up my check, and being pulled over specifically and being profiled as if I was a sex worker because I was visibly trans. And so me being visibly trans and him being a cis male in the car automatically made the police stop us for what they said was our brake light was not working right. But that was something that they only discovered after they put on their lights to pull us over, because we weren't even using the brakes. So, and when you just look at that situation and then you kind of spread that out, there's been times in Little Haiti, Florida, where I was stopped going for work because I happened to be in a place where there was rampant prostitution. And so just being trans, walking in the street, you're already profiled to be a sex worker and targeted for arrest. And even during outreach during that point in time as well, I was stopped by police and was told that I would be getting, can't get arrested for passing out condoms to sex workers on the street. So, when you really look at that and then think of our lived life experiences and people who aren't on the level of where we're at to actually be a part of this panel, it's just kind of atrocious and disturbing. But I know that we can work on some other things. I know everyone else has different examples as well.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone have any other examples?
Yeah, so it's never I've never been scared about being a trans man. It's more about being a black man. So being pulled over, it's now of course I was in the car. I was coming back with some coworkers working for Girl Scouts, and my coworkers are majority females, and they were Caucasian, and I was in the back seat, and they got pulled over for speeding. And when the cop, ran the lights, plates, everything came back fine, and the next question was, well, why is he with you? And it was like, I don't understand why you're asking. Like, everything was fine. You gave the warning. Why are you asking? Why am I with you? And then it went from, well, sir, are you sure you're supposed to be with them? Like, and then he started asking them, are you sure you're supposed to, like, are you all safe in there? And I'm like, what? We all have on our uniforms from where we work at, and it's still like, why getting interrogated? After like all these questions, then he finally let us go. But it didn't make any sense to me. It's like, this have anything to do with the law was being broken. So why does it matter if they're with me at like, and that was my first time where it wasn't again like being trans, it was being a black man. And so I'm saying to myself, I'm thinking like, wow, okay, everything I'm a black guy, like just let me get past this. Then if I find out I'm trans, what's the next thing going to be like? Like, you're not going to test the masculinity. Like, it was just so many things that ran through my head of like, what's going to go on. So it's always like, once they find this layer out, the next intersection, like what's going to happen next.
It's true, and that's what creates the anxiety. That's what creates the fear of going out in public. That's what, when you kind of explain the trans identity to many people, I don't think they realize how many layers there are to it. Going out, having situations like that happen over and over and over. And like Aryah said, we are fortunate enough to be in the position of advocating and being able to tell these stories to bring light to it. But think of all of the generations that went through that before it was brought to light, who just had no choice but to deal with it, Does anyone else have any other examples of situations that have happened between LGBTQ individuals and law enforcement?
I can give my story. So, as a police officer in this field, when I first started in law enforcement at another agency, it was a smaller agency in a different county. And as a gay man, I felt like I couldn't come out on the job. Like I just, if I came out on the job, I knew it would have been bad. And just because of the atmosphere I was working in at that time, and I'm going back 30 years, so it's been a while, but, and thank goodness things have changed. But to, and then I heard, senior management and even a chief back then, 30 years ago, make the comment, well, if I found out I had and he used the F word, faggot, on this department, I would fire them in a heartbeat. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm in this job and I'm doing a great job. Now you make me feel like I'm not belonging. So even within the department, it can happen. And I do hear stories from other officers from around the country that will contact me because they don't know where to turn or what to do when things like that happen within their agency. And the first thing I say is, well, OPD's hiring, we'll accept you. So no matter who you are, basically, kind of thing. So, so even within sometimes the culture, and I'm sure it still happens around, in different areas around the country, within the culture, it's hard for people to be out there and advocate if they're still in fear of losing their job, a job that they probably came in to actually do good and make a difference from the inside. So that existed back then. And as you said, steps have changed, being out and proud on the job for many years and advocating for that, for people to, be inclusive and be out and also make that change from within, has, hopefully made an impact.
No, absolutely. I want to offer this question to the group. How do you think we got to this point? Where did the miscommunication, where did the miseducation, where do you think this stemmed from?
I'll kind of say something, but just from what I know, and I try to listen when I teach law enforcement officers, they're always like, well, everything's happening so fast. It's like even within the trans community, things change very quickly, and things like that. And they're like, so sometimes, law enforcement, sometimes they want to try their best. And I think, because they're not involved in it day to day, they might make those mistakes or misgender someone or things like that. And that's the things, we're trying to change, so that doesn't happen. But I think a lot of times we live in a world that everything changes so fast that it's hard for people, if you're not part of it or involved in it, it's hard for those individuals to keep up with all the changes that are constantly occurring.
And James, like you mentioned about Stonewall, Stonewall happened because the community was fed up.
Yeah, absolutely.
That lack of education that you were pointing at, Nikole, you're asking about why is there no education? It's because of the continuance of no education for decades upon decades, to where specifically transgender and non-conforming people were largely ignored, even though we have existed since prehistory. And so all of a sudden, people got fed up. The community got fed up. We became more visible. We came out of the closet. We weren't living in stealth. And so that emergence, community-wise, I believe is what caught people to where they felt like it was too fast. And it wasn't really too fast because it's always been there. It's just the dearth and the lack of having programs, educational systems, police officer training that really incorporates these cultural understandings. The lack of that is what has led to all the xenophobia, the racism, the homophobia, the transphobia, to just kind of build up to where it becomes a natural part of enforcing law. And so what we're looking at now, especially with our federal programs and our connections within like the Department of Justice and whatnot, is to catch up to that educational component and those education pieces that have been missing for so long.
Absolutely.
Nikole, I just want to add, on the simplest form of the answer to the question is us. We got us here because they wasn't willing to do that. They didn't volunteer to be that way. We had to, be activists and do it ourselves, create organizations, in the organizations that we work in that are white led, we had to fight and tell them that, hey, you need to actually also cater to this group of people also and speak out here. It's us, and unfortunately, like so many other things or issues that come about, we should have to bear our own burdens, but that is what has to happen. And so with it comes to law enforcement, standing up at town halls and city halls and talking about this, getting in relationships with your council people so that when these citizen review boards come up, that you have a voice there and that you're being spoken for. And, unfortunately, what we're talking about here and having someone like Officer Young or like in my city, Officer King, that's rare. That's not across the board, across the nation where there's LGBT liaisons. So, where I live at right now, I live 10 miles from the city of Atlanta. So technically right now where my house is not in the city of Atlanta. I don't have those same protections that I have down the street going to Atlanta. My sheriff is notorious. People in the state are scared of my sheriff. So there's the liaison, there's those police and citizen police academy here. And because my town is much smaller than I live in outside of Atlanta. So think about that, which small towns make up way more than our big cities that we're always talking about. So there's more of us that are actually afraid to have negative experiences and don't have that support than there are of us that do.
Absolutely.
Right. And I just want to chime in just like you said, it's definitely on us. We have to, I feel as though, when you say we move too fast, it's like we only want to do like let's take each letter of the alphabet and take it one time. Let's work with the lesbians and let's go to the gays. It's like until you get to each one, then I'll get I feel like that's where we messed up at. I feel as though you can, even with having, again, we have an LGBT liaison in Orlando. That's definitely good, but eventually we're going to need just a trans liaison because it's totally different. And again, we have to open up those doors and bridge those gaps. But again, until we understand that it's on us to make sure that we hold ourselves accountable and say that, hey, we need this, and say what we need and mean what we say, because I feel as though sometimes we put those boxes of saying like, well, we have this LGBT liaison and that's going to be enough, and it's not, because we're different. It's a look, again, with the pronouns, the dead naming, it's a different, maybe even database that needs to be required for us in in itself versus just saying, oh, the LGBT liaison. It needs to be just a trans liaison.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
I agree.
and that's just my opinion. Eventually, getting there. But again, we're starting somewhere. But yeah.
And it started with us, and that whole, oh, let's do the gays and the lesbian, like that was something they took it away from us because they felt that you had to present a certain way in order to get the points across. So we were pushed aside and forgotten until we raised hell, and started demanding that, no, you have to listen to us. It's been too long. We've been dying. It's been too long. We have so much loss.
Yeah, and that was the reasoning behind that. Is I've had conversations with people, and sometimes they'll attribute it to times are changing, and I don't think necessarily it's times are changing. It's that our community has fought bare knuckle for centuries and years to get to this point, and I think now we're at the point where we're finally able to elect LGBTQ individuals. We're finally in a space where LGBTQ individuals, especially trans people, are in positions of power finally. How many years, if you look back, where was there a trans person that had any type of weight to change anything? You know what I mean? It's so many layers that kind of go to this. I want to switch gears a bit, and I do want to ask, say one of our viewers feels like they've been discriminated against by law enforcement. I know everyone's in a different area, but what is something that they can do, or what are their rights, just to make sure that they're aware of them?
Well, in order to frame that, I think the first thing is to take assessment of your safety. Like be honest of your trust or distrust of any law enforcement official or anyone that's attached to them. And to reach out first to those who you do trust. And I'm sure as you reach into those networks, you can find a plug like one of us, that's able to kind of be that conduit and that segue, between justice on the legal side and then community. And so I think that one of the first steps I just want to put out there is to assess your safety and your comfortability.
Absolutely. So you want to add to that?
I feel like that's a trick question because obviously it's going to be different where you are.
Absolutely.
So what I'm going to do is pivot more to what you can do to advocate for your safety against law enforcement. And so I think that regardless, my number one thing I want people always to hear that I say around law enforcement, no matter what your personal feelings are around law enforcement, is that I think that it is important that you understand and know the inner workings of the agency as much as you are allowed to, because there's some things that you're not going to learn from a fraternal police order, okay? But if there is an opportunity for a Citizens Police Academy, please take it. There's things that they would tell you about approach and what they should be saying to you and not doing, things about their policies, their SOPs, that you need to know when you're out in the field, when you're out and about and you're being approached by an officer. If you have a Citizens Review Board, please know somebody on that, what the process is for that in order to be able to make a complaint. And then also to know what their powers and authorities are, because some of them are just shells and they actually have no authority whatsoever. There's no subpoena power or anything like that. Get to understand and know the law for your state and internal affairs. So just recently, a month ago, I think in Georgia, we're going to have to get rid of internal affairs because a bill was just passed that where if an officer is being investigated, they have to know ahead of time. What's the purpose of investigating them? if you're telling them, hey, by the way, we're investigating you for misdoing. So these are things that I think that we should arm ourselves on about knowing. And then that is how you can assess how to move forward. And if those things don't exist, then there's your call to action if you want to that charge, you want to be able to do that. There's Cop Watch out there. That's where you could do it with a group of other people have been watching law enforcement, making sure that they're treating people humanely and fairly with your neighborhoods. Neighborhood Watch, of course, something that everybody else also knows also. There's several different ways about doing this and that you can advocate for, that when you're advocating to also law enforcement about this, these are free things. These are not spending money on. So if you pitch them and tell them, hey, going and starting Citizen Police Academy to where where citizens are coming in with the recruits, that's not costing them any money because they already are running the academy. It's not costing them any money to allow for a ride along. It's not costing them any money well, in my, deputy sheriff, is not costing them any money to do that. So it doesn't cost you any money to have a neighborhood watch. These type of things that we can do ourselves. And I just want to point that out because, again, depending on where we live, depends on what rights we have in the avenue about being able to make these complaints. So I'm telling you how you can create your own avenue to be able to make these complaints.
Thank you so much for that, Chanel. Absolutely. Does anyone else want to add to that?
Chanel hit it kind of on the head. It's like we want people to be involved with us, just like we want to be. We're all one community. I mean, the reality is, obviously, we have our different experiences, different lives, and things. But Chanel hit it perfectly. We and Nikole, with all of our brand new recruits, literally before they even go into the field training program out on the street, we have them sit down at one-on-ones or even small groups with members of the community. And we always invite members of our trans community to sit down with them and kind of explain to them what the community expects of our officers here in Orlando. So in demanding those programs from your cities and from your elected officials for your police departments to put those into place, but you have to have those in place. So, without them, it makes it harder for everyone. And I don't think that builds the trust. Transparency is one of the biggest things. I mean, like I said, unfortunately, I live in a city that's very progressive and has pushed for a lot of these things. The transparency, putting all of your policies online so anyone can review them. There's nothing like why departments hide their policies. I don't know why. It's put those online, get those out there. Officer involved shootings, those are all posted. Things like that. Anything that is happening needs to go out to the public. Obviously, if it's an active investigation, there might be things. Obviously, the state attorney or something may not want out there right away. But if you can get it out there, get it out there. So that the public is aware and educating the public and inviting the public in. And like you said, Ty, when we invited the trans community here to the police department, I know a lot of people were nervous because they're like, I don't know if I want to go. It's kind of, is this one of those tricks?
Right.
But
I was one of them.
So the police department, we want to hear from the community, and agencies like ours do. But you're right. It depends on where you're at. Depends on the elected officials in that area and the the overall sentiment in that area. How law enforcement may view the community and how the community views law enforcement. So, but thank you, Chanel.
I just wanted to add something to that because something I recognized that Chief Young had said earlier was about him doing law enforcement trainings at the Law Enforcement Training Center. Is that where you're at in Florida? You do it for several officers, is that correct?
Different departments, different. I work with Aryah. We work with the Department of Justice on, we just updated the transgender training for law enforcement. So that program, as well as other LGBT issues. So a lot of times agencies will call me because they're having an issue of some sort. They usually don't call me until they have an issue, which I wish agencies would get over that mentality. It's put things in place so you don't get to those kind of thing. But they'll call me and say, hey.
So that's what I was getting at, is that I think the biggest problem that we have, and the reason why it's systematic, is because if the law enforcement training center or our post is what we have here in Georgia, wherever the peace officers are being trained within their states or their municipalities, if they are not required to have LGBTQ training interactions with the community, then many of them are not going to want to do it. And so that needs to be put in there to where that's available. All the agencies are required to have some kind of educational courses to take every single year, and we don't have that here in Georgia. There isn't any education in there. So just like with Chief Young is saying about when there's issues that want to bring brought in, that's the same time that our LGBT liaison will come in also and do it, and they'll bring somebody else extra in also. But by that time, to me, it's too late.
Yep.
They really, in order to change the culture, you have to start at the very beginning. And so it should be embedded in there. And, I like to say something which is different than a lot of people in our community, because our community likes to be about, hugging and love and all kind of stuff. But I don't believe that everybody is generally nice. I think people are generally nice because the law tells them they have to be. And so as long as the rules and the requirements in that law enforcement training requires them to be that way, then they will do that. But until that's required, they're not going to.
And then the department under the Department of Justice is CRS, or Community Relations Service. And through that, when we talk about the power that we have as a community, individuals like myself and James are a part of that. And what we're doing is doling out this education with the power of the Department of Justice behind it to give to local precincts, to different places that have had issues with our community. But in order to really push that and make it more of a mandatory thing, like what you're talking about, Chanel, to make that a part of the mandatory curriculum to become a police officer, we need the back of the community in order to do so. So realize the strength in your voice. If you pushing those things as a community and putting numbers behind it can give us, who are kind of in the end, more push to push this beyond an optional thing, or even soon what we're doing is our inaugural national pilot for really spreading this out across the country, but to make it a mandatory thing for all precincts all across the United States.
It's true. It's about building that trust. And I know a lot of people are scared to tell their stories, but at the same time, those stories are what we can bring to the police department and say, this is exactly what's going on and what we need to change. Those stories are what kind of really create the change. I want to answer. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to make sure, but also challenge your police department if they do not have it. Like, again, we have to make that challenge them. If they say they don't have anyone, you see someone right now, you have Deputy Chief James Young that you can say, hey, it's someone that's with enforcement that has a background, reach out to them. You have to start using your voice and using the resource that you have.
Yeah, I see some comments there. They're wanting your contact info, James.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a couple questions. First, we have a question: will the video remain on YouTube after the live stream? And yes, we'll make sure that stays on. And then there's another one. So James, can you say your email for people so they can write it down?
Sure. It's james.young@orlando.gov. james.young@orlando.gov.
Perfect. Thank you. So I kind of want to wrap everything up with one last question. Short-term or long-term solution, but what do you want to see in your local police department, or what do you want to see mandated across the United States for police department when it comes to the inclusion of LGBTQ individuals, including, and most specifically, trans individuals?
I have a list. I would absolutely love to make it mandatory that every single state has a statewide citizen review board, and I think that should actually be broken down into municipalities also. But at the very least, there should be a statewide. It should be representative of the electors in the state of Georgia. So I need to see a trans person to have a seat on every single one in every state. Also, that we need to have a lot more. Those citizen review boards needs to have subpoena power to be able to actually hold the officers accountable. I need to be able to see that the captains or the chiefs or whoever is in charge of the sheriff, who's in charge of the law enforcement agencies, that they actually do have to have communications and town halls with various different communities. Now, of course, there's some that do that, but they do it actually by choice. When they're being nice, or again, when something bad happens, they try to make amends. But this is something that actually should be required part of their job to be able to answer to the questions. And so when things happen, and so things don't escalate. I mean that all of them should be required to have at least offer ride-alongs, and also citizens academies, and every single one of them should be able to have their standard operating procedures should be made public. So the public knows that when they're encountering with this law enforcement agencies, what is supposed to be and what is not supposed to be. I like people to know that there's a difference between, when there's bad policy and a rogue cop. And knowing what their SOPs are actually kind of helps that.
Thank you so much for that, Chanel. Anyone else want to add to that?
I second all of that. Every single bit of that. I do want to highlight that civilian review board. I believe that they should be given more oversight in law enforcement agencies and to precincts, and to really balance out that accountability. bring in civilian review boards for internal kind of investigations when kind of things come up against our community. And like I said, mandate the competency trainings for all officers before they're able to even go out on the field. And decriminalize sex work. They want to put that out there because that's one of those things that they use to attack us as trans people, period, no matter if you're engaged in the sex work or not.
Anyone else want to add anything to that? All right, so last question. What do you hope to see different in 5 years? I know we listed all these solutions, but say you had a magic wand, say that you woke up one day and Trump wasn't there anymore, and we had a new president, and we had policies and procedures in an accepting, welcoming world. What is something that you would like to see, or how would you envision it?
Well, I mean, you said magic wand. I immediately thought about having the Amazons be the police, but make them trans Amazons. But yeah, that was my first thought. Wanted to put that out.
Anyone else?
Go ahead, Ty.
I think for me, I would like to see more. When we talk about policies, I would like to see more updated policies, more transparency. But I guess I would like to, when you talk about transparency and policies, is that it's specifically for each, I don't want to say gender or people, but it's specifically for, if it's dealing with, Black and brown, then we have Aryah for those people. I would like to see more of them coming into our community, and I would see more educational. We say we had review boards and everything that that was listed, that people didn't realize we had these resources. Making sure that we know we have these resources. I feel like just like we have DARE in school or whatnot, that was so big or whatnot, but you didn't know that you could do a community review board. You didn't know you had all these access to even learn and to know the laws and know your right. I would like to see more educational going into the vulnerable areas, so they do know that they can get these, versus having to go to the center to learn these classes. The classes should be there where they can get them, because I just want to see more accessibility, being able to people to get more educated versus just hearing it from word of mouth, being able to get these classes and lessons.
It's true. The accessibility portion is so important in the sense of you shouldn't have to go to one specific place to get it. You should be able to go anywhere and get the same type of trainings and the same type of treatment. James, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I agree completely. Like I said, we're at a department. We do go out into the community. We have a lot of community centers throughout Orlando. We actually host a lot of community meetings at those community centers, and we address every issue, and we invite everyone in those communities so we can educate them on the things that we have. We have the Citizens Police Academies. We have all types of training programs with citizens and all the things that we do. So we do that. It would be awesome if every agency did that, because I know from my experience, what happens in another city thousands of miles away affects all of law enforcement and can disintegrate that trust in every community quicker than it takes to build it up. And so if every community was on the same page, it would be awesome. That's that 5-year dream magic wand thing, and we're all on that same page. Would be awesome. So like I said, it's the work all of you do that has really made the difference. And then I would love to see more trans persons within law enforcement. I mean, agencies there are trans persons within law enforcement, but I would like to see more. So I hope that if anyone out there is listening and wants to join law enforcement, a lot of the changes you can make are from within. And for someone like me, to openly gay male to reach the rank of deputy chief, in a department, just shows you that things can change and things do get better, and that's my hope for our community as well.
And real quick before we end,
Nikole.
Yeah.
There is a person that talking about colorism and access to privilege. And so I wanted to answer your question, but address the privilege part as a person who has privilege, because after this meeting that we're having now, I'm actually going to jump on as a my delegate meeting to the Democratic National Convention. And so everything that we're talking about here, I'm actually going to the platform committee about. And so for me, actually changing the entire criminal justice system and the way it is, because it all connects together. And so I think that's where it starts at, is understanding and knowing about how the laws need to change so that people are not already being targeted and are going to fall into this trap about getting arrested. I mean, why in the hell is anywhere jaywalking a crime? Why is walking across the street not using a crosswalk a crime that actually can get you locked up, right? Okay, so these things like that, and then about the bails and the bonds, and that falls in trap again, to where you're arrested if you don't pay that. So it becomes a whole thing, and then of course getting into the actual jail system or the prison system is this old ecosystem that is very hard to penetrate by even the most brilliant organizers. Okay, so it really does start. It's a full circle that needs to happen, and we can't talk about just changing a law enforcement agency without talking about changing the entire criminal justice system. So I do like the gentleman's question, and I wanted people to know, to reach out to people that that may have this access to all these answers that you don't know, because that is true that, unfortunately, this news does not get out to everybody, just reach every community. So a person may not know where to report this information to, right? But if you know someone that has had some kind of interactions like that, then reach out to them so that they can actually be your voice and take you with them. I was saying, like to say, is that, leadership is creating a path of succession. So the idea is that somebody else will be doing what I'm doing, and it won't be me anymore.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Thank you so much, Aryah, James, Ty, Chanel. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for the work that you do. And thank you for being so open and honest on this conversation today. And thank you, viewers. Thank you all so much for joining us. And please remember, vote, vote, vote. Have a great day, you all.
Thank you,
Make sure you vote. Bye, y'all.